Okay, so development environments, what are they? So first, we wanted to kind of introduce development environments and talk a bit about how to set them up, because we know this is something you might not get exposed to during university, but it's something important once you go into a company and start a job. So as the name says, development environments are where your code lives, where you develop, and where your code runs. And usually it is the first stage of the development life cycle, which also includes the staging and the production steps. So, as Samuel mentioned, we're going to talk to you a bit about setting up a development environment and what it entails. Uh, and you're going to see that it is a pain in the ass. Hashtag Dean's warning. And yeah, I think let's get started. So, the first thing you might need to do, or you will need to do when setting up. Oh, well,
Yeah,
oh,
it's okay.
wrong slide. That's fine. So let's move on. I think I covered. Oh, actually, that's not. As I was saying, setting up a development environment can be messy, can be lengthy, and is not straightforward because there are many tools you're gonna have to keep up with. You're gonna have to know what's updated, keep up to date. And if you're going to be using containers, which we'll cover in a bit, we'll cover why you probably should be using them. It adds complexity. One additional thing that's hard is that you need to be syncing your environment with everyone on the team. So everyone needs to be on exactly the same setup. Otherwise, you might get issues or bugs that crop up on one machine but not the other, and this is what we usually call works on my machine problem. And so this is also something we're going to cover, how mycelium we're going to cover how mycelium helps with that. Not only that, setting up a development environment is usually a manual process that has uh, uh, basically allows for a lot of errors because it's basically a human task. And so that basically adds to the complexity and to the difficulty of setting them up. So for setting up an environment, the first thing you're gonna need is you're gonna need source control. What is source control? It's a tool, maybe the most famous of which is Git, but there are other tools like Mercurial, SVN, TFS. Would definitely recommend Git. That allows you to keep track of your code changes. So anytime basically you add a part of code, you can basically know what you added, what you removed, and also it allows you to experiment easily without worrying about messing up your project, because at any point you can basically decide to discard all the changes and go back to a working copy of your code. What it also allows you to do is that if you're on a team, like you would probably be, uh, you can easily manage multiple people working on the same, let's say, file. And if there are conflicts, you can manage the merging and basically have everyone's changes included. Uh, and for more advanced scenarios, it allows you to take advantage of CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous deployment for when you're moving your code to production. Now, I realize there might be some new terms discussed here, so feel free to kind of hit us after the webinar, maybe in the Q&A, ask us about them. We're happy to chat about those. Uh, so we have mentioned source control. The next thing you probably want to have is shell you're comfortable with, that you like. And shells are basically what you would have inside a terminal, or what you would probably refer to as a CLI. Also, there are multiple types of shells. Most famous ones: Bash, ZSH, there's Fish. Uh, you can choose whichever you prefer. Now, the advantage of having and being comfortable with one is that it allows you to navigate your folders, to run scripts, and more importantly, it allows you to automate your workflows. So if you want to basically run your scripts automatically and have your computer do stuff for you, this is what you would need. The next thing is, well, you want to code, so you need to choose a language and you need to install that language. And usually that includes probably the runtime, and depending, for example, if what type of language you're choosing, you might need a compiler, you might need an interpreter, but also you might need SDKs or software development kits, which usually include debugging tools. They include runtime tools. Everything you might need while developing, and again, depending on the language you choose, on how it runs, the complexity here varies. Next thing you'll probably need is a text editor. I believe most of you should be familiar with. You probably use it many times in your assignments. So text editors help you code better. They make your life easier by giving you, for example, autocomplete, giving you definitions of functions maybe. But IDEs, which are kind of text editors on steroids, they are better for you because basically they encompass multiple functionalities all in the same program. So they allow you to compile, run, debug, and they allow you to basically they integrate source control, they integrate many other tools, integrate a terminal. All of that happens in the same program. Uh, and in addition to everything we mentioned before, you're probably gonna need some additional dev tools, depending also on what project you use. So for example, if you're a web developer, you probably need to use Chrome dev tools, which allow you to inspect the DOM, which is what you see, the HTML, inspect the network requests, maybe check on performance. Uh, you can use Postman, for example, to test your APIs. You can use tools that allow you to automatically test or automate your tests, so that it opens up a browser that automatically loads your web page and starts clicking buttons to make sure everything is working. So all of these are part of the tools that you might need while developing, and obviously they vary depending on what project you're developing. Now, we reach the point of talking about containers. And before we mention why they're good, we probably want to kind of introduce them a bit and quickly say what they are. So containers think of them as boxes that isolate your processes or your programs, allow them to run separately from everything around them, so that if you have multiple programs or processes, they do not interfere with each other. You can, for example, run multiple language versions that might not be compatible usually. So let's say one example is Python 2, Python 3. If you run them inside a container, then there shouldn't be a problem because they're isolated, and that's the whole point. And they're usually useful for when you're doing advanced architectures like microservices. Now, containers have been around, the technology has been around since 1979, but for the longest time, it wasn't widely used. It didn't receive many updates until Docker came in 2013 uh, and made it more mainstream. And the reason why it became more mainstream is because Docker allowed developers to create containers in an easy, or actually easier, way. Uh, so what makes it special is that basically you can easily install it. It runs on most operating systems, so like Linux, Mac, Windows. Uh, it gives you containers, so it gives you resource isolation, network isolation, user isolation, all of that. Everything you would get from a container, you get from Docker, because Docker is basically a container technology. Now, why you would want to use Docker? Because as we said, you might have a project that has multiple components that need to be talking to each other. But also because currently best practices are that when you're deploying, you deploy using Docker because then it's very easy for you to remove the old container, add a new container on production, and have your users have access to the latest features. And so by using Docker on the local machine or on the local development environment, you make it so that the two environments, local and production, have so much in common and very little differences that you lower the risk of having issues pop up when you go to production, which is something you do not want. Now, to set them up, this is what you would need a Docker file. This is what it would look like. I won't go into details, but basically it has multiple keywords. You can run commands in it, and basically you plug it into Docker, and it will create a container for you. Now, this is basically kind of an overview of what you would need when you're setting up a development environment. And as you can probably see, it's not necessarily easy. It's not fast. It takes time, and this is where myceleum comes in. So myceleum is all about allowing you as a developer to get development environments on demand that are pre-configured, to create them locally on your machine, and more importantly, to directly start projects without worrying about all those steps. And then again, it allows you to easily sync those environments with everyone you're working with, so that everyone has the same setup, everyone is coding on in the same environment, and you don't have issues on a machine but not the other. We are using Docker under the hood. So basically, by using myceleum, you are already Dockerizing your applications. We try to make it very, very easy to Dockerize your project, to set up your environment. And this is something you're going to see when Hassan starts demoing. And as I mentioned, it allows you to sync those environments across teams. And finally, I would like to just go through a few use cases of how myceleum could help you in a class settings, in a classroom at university, for example. So scenarios are you can basically, if you have an assignment, you can easily set up your environment. Any language you choose without worrying about setting it up, without spending time setting it up. You can directly jump into these languages without being discouraged about, oh, okay, how am I going to do it? I know when I started, I would be interested in a language. By the time I finished setting it up, I would have lost interest in trying it out. Again, in a classroom settings, professors could, for example, set up environments and then share them using OrSync with the students, or the other way around. Students could basically make an assignment and share it with their professors, so that professors can easily run the programs and grade them. But more importantly for us, we think that this will expose you to containers and Docker, which is something that's now more and more widely used in the workspace, and we think this is important for you as students. Now, I kind of covered everything I want to cover in this presentation. Now we're going to move on to a demo with Hassan, who's also our third co-founder. And after that, we can do a Q&A session where we can answer any question you might have.
Myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Rassan, or I go by Gussie in France. So if you want to call me that, feel free to do so. And as Bassem just mentioned, I'm going to be doing a quick demo. Just give me a few seconds to share my screen. And once everything is configured, we'll get started. You guys can see?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so to start the demo, before we hop into kind of like our use case, we're going to do just a quick overview of the application, kind of get you acquainted to it for those of you who haven't seen it yet, and also maybe talk about some of the features that are included, and then we'll kind of jump into a use case that we think could be a good one for educational sector. So this is the application. It's a desktop application. It runs on every operating system. And it's when you land on the homepage, you'll see I'm currently signed in, so I see a little more than what you would see, but you would just have a list of environments. All of these are pre-configured and come with the tools that Bassem was talking about. So version control is going to be included. All sorts of different shells are available to you, so you can customize it to your needs. And any additional packages can also be added relatively easily. If you need more information about any of these languages, you can always click on them. And there'll be like a big README documentation that just talks about what's included inside of it. It'll get you a little more familiar about how to use some of the particular settings and what the use cases for these environments would be. The general tab is also a good way of getting yourself introduced to myceleum. We try to include this inside of the application to get people a little more familiar. And finally, we have a little section about the CLI, just because we ship with the CLI. So if you're comfortable with the shell, you can always use that to interact with the with myceleum. Anyways, when you're ready to go, you can basically download an application. But before that, we're just going to jump in and kind of show the use case that we have for today. So the idea that we had was we were targeting an assignment for a web development class. We came up with it a couple days ago, and the general idea is the following. You've been tasked with making sure that all species of animals that are going to make it onto the ark, this would be Noah's arks, are in pairs. So you're, in a sense, looking for unique individuals. They're not part of a pair of species. These animals are going to be represented by numbers just to make it a little more convenient for us to work with. So we'll just be able to represent them as an array of numbers. And what we're going to need to build, because we want to be modern, is we're going to build a front end using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's going to communicate with a backend server that is going to basically find the unique individual and return it to us in on the front end, presenting it in a nice UI. The final thing that's provided is our professor has basically given us a working web server that we can compare our results to. So from this prompt, we're going to get started and yeah, get going. So the first thing that we're going to do is pick
I'm sorry, we have a question.
Yes.
By version control, do you mean it makes it easy to switch from different versions of the language, for example, from Python 2 to 3 to Python 3?
So do you want to take it, or I can take it? Yeah. So the question is, by version control, do we make it easy to switch between language versions? So version control, the one that I was talking about, is actually just including the tools to work with Git, GitHub, and other source control repos. But we do make it really simple inside of the application to switch between languages. So we provide both Python 2, Python 3, and inside of those, we can even provide finer grained versions. So you could run 2.7 versus 3.7, 3.4, whatever you want.
So quickly, I want to add that usually version control is about tracking the changes within a single code base or a single application. So it's independent of the languages. It's any you add lines as you remove lines, you add files, remove files. This is what you track, and this is what at any point you can save if you want, and you can roll back to a previous version. And this is what we mean by.
Yeah, and during the demo, I can actually show this off because it's going to be part of the IDE that we spin up at one point. Anyway, so let's get started. And as I mentioned, we're going to pick a front-end framework, something that's going to be able to serve JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So one good choice is PHP and Apache because it runs in the background, which is super convenient for us. So the way it works is you just download it. You're going to select a version. In this particular case, we're just providing the latest. And then you click next. stuff is going to be happening in the background. Basically, myceleum is trying to optimize the setup time by performing whatever action it can at any given time. And you get to the second page where you have settings for this particular environment. So this is how you can tweak it a little bit. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but the ones that should stand out are the shell choice, port mapping, which will be one that we changed. This is a way of exposing a port because the container, as we mentioned, was isolated. This is, Bassem mentioned that it created an isolated environment. So in order for our computer to be able to communicate with the container, we need to create some sort of bridge. And this is what this port mapping does. And then we don't need to modify environment variables or commands. We can skip the Docker fragment. And at the very bottom would be ways, it's where you can add additional packages or CLI tools that you would want inside of the container. In our case, I think we're good to go. So we're just going to click finish. Again, this should launch and create the workspace for us. And we are all set there. Last thing that I'm going to do is select a project path. So this is a directory inside of my computer where I will be working, and I'm going to pick front end. This is initial, yeah. Open, and I'll toggle the launch IDE and pick the myceleum IDE. So myceleum actually comes bundled with an IDE that you can use, or you can use any IDE that you're familiar with. The nice thing about this bundled IDE is it's going to be running inside of the container, so you don't actually need to download it onto your machine. It's just going to be running in the container, and we're going to remote connect to it. So we're all set here, and now we can just start the container and open the IDE. And we'll land on, oh, this was supposed to be empty. Sorry, guys. We'll just delete that and recreate it. A simple index, not HTML file. And here, let me just grab, whoops, the keys. This quick HTML template, because I hate writing this out. And we'll just add a title onto the page using an H1 tag saying AUB, oh my God, that was ARC assignment, and got to close that tag. So this is running, and if we were to open Chrome, since we're using Apache and it's basically listening for file changes, we should be able to just access this particular page at port 5000, which is where we started it. So here's the port, and if we were to make a change on assignments, because we got multiple, and we refresh the page, it's all good and it's live. Now, instead of building out the entire page that I have in mind, I've already done it ahead of time, so we're just going to load that project instead of this one, and we'll move on to the backend portion. So we can shut down this container and go to PHP Apache 2. I can actually rename this one. Whoops, is it still sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. PHP Apache 2, and we'll call this front end. And this one is going to be pointed at the completed front end. Besides that, there's absolutely no difference between this configuration and the other one, and we're good to go, so we can run this. We'll open the HTML as well. So now, if we go to that same port, 80.
I think you opened.
No, it should be correct. No? 5000.
This is another page.
Literally spent all day. 3000, let's try that. 3001. Okay, I don't know what was going on there. Sorry about that, guys. The ports seem to have been taken. Anyways, this is the front end that I was talking about. So this is still pure CSS, JS, and HTML. And it's just got a little bit of styling to make it look a little nicer. And if we were to submit the form, so the idea here is that in the top portion, you can create manual input that would be representative of those animals we talked about in the beginning. And the bottom one will automatically generate those that input for you and send it off to the server. And if we submit it, we'll notice that we get two responses, one from this professor server that says that the front end couldn't connect to it, and one from the server that we're supposed to build that also says that we can't connect to it. And the reason behind that is that we're not running those servers yet. So for the professor's server, they also have an environment. The only difference is that it's running in what we call production mode, which means that we're not intended to connect to it. Instead, we're just going to run it in the background and it should respond. And we should just be able to run this. We'll notice that the port mapping is 8082 to 80. And if we come to our front end code, we'll be able to see that we're hitting this particular server here in the JS folder, the app. We'll notice that in our server array, the professor one is going to be hitting 8082. And if we rerun that same input over here, we should get a different response. In this case, it's still telling us that the input is invalid, but we are getting a response from the server. And if we change the input to have one of those unique species or individual, and we resubmit, it'll tell us that number 2 is the unique individual. So now it's our job to replicate and hopefully beat the time that the professor has, which is going to be tough on this particular input because it's 0, by starting our own dev server. And given that we don't know what backend to use, but we have the flexibility of myceleum. In this particular case, we thought of going with Java, since it's possibly still the most popular language in the world. And this one is already configured. And there's also a default template that might be a template that your professor gives you so that you don't need to recreate an entire web server, but you can just focus on the part of the code that matters. And we'll launch that and connect to it. And without going through too much of the code, did I go into full screen? Okay. The file that we're supposed to modify is this this unique answer. But before we do any of that, let's just make sure that we can run the server, even if the answer is not going to be correct. And to do so, since this is an IDE, you'll notice that it comes with a run command. Everything is integrated inside of the platform. And it should be running this any second now. I'll keep an eye on it. Okay. So the server's starting. We're seeing the logs on the bottom. And if we come back to here, we see that it's running and we can resubmit that same form and see whether or not we get an answer. In this case, we do get an answer from both of them, but we notice that our answer is incorrect, and that's because our algorithm is incorrect. So if we look at the code here, it's just picking a random number from the array, which is definitely not going to work. So here we can make the modifications that we need to. I don't know if you want to open a poll for what implementation might work, but a trivial one that might be someone's first guess would be to sort the array. So we can sort nums, and then we can iterate through the array from I is equal to 0 to I is smaller than nums dot minus 1. And we're going to increment by 2. And the reason we're doing this is that after the array is sorted, we're expecting them to be in this type of order. So we wanted to check the current index versus the one in front. And we can import array here. Is it arrays or array? It should be part of the standard library.
Guys,
Yeah.
arrays or array?
Yep. It's arrays. Okay, so if num of I is different than nums of I plus 1, then we know that that's a unique individual. We can set the answer is equal to nums of I, and then we can break from the loop. And in theory, Once this code is good to go, we can restart that server. And we should be getting proper answers. And server started, so we can try to run it. Professor comes back with 2, and we come back with 0. So clearly it did not work. Int I, integer nums.
Hassan wasn't great at math in
Yeah.
class, guys.
I have no idea why it's not working. Yeah. Anyways, well, I'll fix it with the solution that I know will work, which is also the optimal solution for those out there who are curious, which is using the property of XOR, which is if you XOR 2 numbers together, or the same number with itself, it's what? You can still do this. Yeah, you can do that. And yeah, this should do it. So what I was saying is a little trick if you guys don't know this, but if you XOR a number with itself, it's always going to return to 0. And by that property, we can basically flip the bits in a way that it's always going to return the unique array if the array has the property that we mentioned before, which is duplicates of everything except for 1. So now if we submit with the server running, we should be getting 2 on both. And if we try with a larger number, like 1,000, we're getting 136. And we can also check with about 1 million entries and should get the result pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I guess I'm still talking.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to point out that Ghassan here is using, or the professor's code is running in Golang, which is a different language, whereas his is running in Java, and it's something mycelium is one of the advantages of using mycelium.
Yeah. Anyways, that finishes up the demo in terms of what we thought of an assignment might look like. And then if we come back to mycelium, there's still a couple of things that we can do to make this even more streamlined. So currently we were using public spores, but in a case where you might need additional tools to be loaded directly inside of the application, let's say you're a professor and you wanted to add a particular CLI that they're supposed to use, or maybe a CLI that generates input to provide to the program, then you can create what we call a custom spore or team spore. And to do this, you would just configure your own workspace as a professor, and then you could just publish that workspace and everyone on your team would receive it. And this might, when you publish it, you just have to rename it to whatever you want. So CMPS? CMPS, sorry, 202.
Yeah.
Okay. And set it to 1, and you'll publish it, and anyone on your team will receive that. So if we go back to our home page and go to the team section, we'll see that spore. So once you've configured your team, you're able to share this. And final little feature that we have included as well is in a situation where you're doing something like us, which is, or what we just did in terms of assignment, you have a front end and a back end running. You might want to not necessarily publish each of the individual components individually. You prefer to kind of package the whole thing in one go. So this is where we have a feature called projects, which is basically bundling workspaces together to allow them to run as a single unit. And to set up a project, you just drag one workspace into the other. It's going to create that collection. All of the settings are here, but they're unique to the project. So the settings you're changing here won't affect the workspace. You can still use that workspace individually. You're just creating kind of project settings in order to help with communication or environment variables. And you can add as many of them as you want. And you'll be able to publish those, they'll sync, and everything will be all set. And I believe that wraps up the demo. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah,
and I guess we can
guys,
switch over to the QA.
Well, I mean, thank you for listening to us, guys. We'll open the floor for some questions. If you want to talk, just raise your hand, like use the raise hand button, and we'll unmute you. Or if you want, just use the Q&A box, and you can answer them as well. Is anyone typing? If not, then are you on mute?
I'm not.
Okay.
Oh, we have a Q&A.
No, I think that's the original one.
You need to mute your laptop.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, guys, I don't think there are any questions, and I totally understand it. It's already. Oh, it's almost 8. So I just wanna any closing messages before I thank everyone.
Well,
Yeah.
the closing
Yeah.
message.
So, guys, first of all, I want to thank you all for joining us. I also want to thank the CSSS Society. Did I get the right number of S's? Yeah.
10 more.
For helping us organize this, and I want to also thank our 2-star interns, Nazir and Serge, who are on the call, who are working really hard with us. And they might tell you bad things about us, and they're not entirely they're not entirely wrong. But guys, one more thing that we wanted to mention, since Basim and myself are both AUB alum, we want to give everyone everyone within CSS department, I guess, the computer science department, we want to give them free access to the myceleum pro tier. So all you'll have to do is create an account with your AUB email, and you will automatically get access to the pro tier. And yeah, this is just because, again, Basim and myself are AUB alum, and we really care about AUB, and I know it's not the easiest period in Lebanon, which is one of the reasons we had to move, but just wanted to thank you guys all for attending, and we will be sharing the recording of this video. And one last thing, and this is I'm actually surprising Serge and Nazir on it, but if you want to schedule a demo, I think they're confident enough with their abilities on mycelium, so just send us an email and you can have a demo with Serge and Nazir at any point. We'll try and arrange the time for you. All right.
You want to give out the email?
Oh yeah, so just hello@mycelium. Yeah, just send an email to hello@mycelium.com. I'm gonna write it. Yeah, you got it. Hello@mycelium.com, and we can schedule a demo call. And a lot of you probably do know Nazir already, so you can just pester him with questions at any point in time. He's quite good with it, and there's also Serge. So again, guys, thank you so much for attending, and I wish you all a great night and a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Where will the recording of this session be posted? I think we're putting it on YouTube.
Yeah, we're gonna upload it on YouTube.
We're gonna upload it on YouTube, and we're gonna send an email to everyone who's attended with a link so that they can access it.
Oh, and guys, if there's anyone who's not AUB who was on the presentation, again, just send us an email. We'll give you also access to the pro tier as a thank you for attending the webinar. All right. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.